Today I want to talk about stories. Stories come up all the time. For example, I'm a man. This is a fence. That's a tree. All of these things are stories. I'm in a world now where people like to say things like, find the story that's as true or truer than the one you're saying. This is something that Byron Katie popularized. She has this really amazing book called Loving What Is, where she talks about when you have a story, sometimes it can be not helpful, and so search for another version of the story that's the opposite in some way. Turn it around and find a version that's as true or truer. The Conscious Leadership Group, which has 15 commitments, one of their commitments is also the opposite is true. Find another story where the opposite is as true or truer. And what I want to say about stories is that stories are not the kind of thing that even can be true. Truth is something that we get when we have, say, math. 1 plus 1 is 2. There's nothing truer than that. That's true. It's true because we're in a system where we have axioms about what 1 means and what plus means and what equals means. And we can deduce from those axioms and this set of rules that 1 plus 1 equals 2. And there's no such thing as a truer thing. Now, when we tell stories in a spoken language, not using pure mathematics, the notion of truth really breaks down because there's no axioms like what constitutes a fence or a person or a tree. And so the way for me to think about stories isn't whether or not they're true or false, but rather they're limiting. Just like a map. If you have a map of, say, the world or a subway system, it doesn't quite make sense to say this map is true. A map of the New York City subway system isn't quite true. It's a nice summary. It's very helpful. It can tell you how to get from here to there in very simplified fashion. But is it true? Well, the aspect ratio is wrong. The sizing and shape changes. It's often missing actual stops. Sometimes there's stops that it has that aren't operational. Sometimes whole lines are closed, right? So it's not true in any meaningful sense, but it can be useful and it can be limiting. And so that's the deal with stories. From my perspective, they're useful in certain ways and limiting in certain ways. And the value of them is their use, and the danger of them is they're limited. And if we forget that they're limited, we can operate as if they are true. And that will lead us to certain conclusions that are inappropriate and unjustified because there's no such thing as a true story. For example, this is a fence. Well, it's also a lot of other things. It's the color black. It's a little bit wet because there's dew. When I say it's a fence, I have not said all the other things about it. All those other things, to describe all of them, would require an infinite amount of words, effectively infinite amount of words, and an effectively infinite amount of time and energy. And I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say this is a fence and be satisfied with having said that. But because I've not said the all-encompassing everything about this fence that's ever possible to say, my claim that this is a fence is limiting. It's a partial summary of what this thing is. It is not it in its entirety, and so it's limiting. And that's fine. It's very useful to call it a fence. I'm not saying don't call it a fence. I'm saying let's remember when we say this is a fence that there's so much more to it than a fence. And let's remember when we tell a story about ourselves or another person. There's always, 100% of the time, so much more. Not just so much more. The thing you've said is a tiny, tiny fraction, almost infinitesimally small fraction of the entirety of that person or that experience or that fence. You've said almost nothing about it, actually. Almost everything about it has been left unsaid. And all those other things matter just as much as the thing that you're saying matters. Now, in this moment, we get to choose which things to highlight, which thing to attend to. And that's fine. Of course, we're going to attend to one or another thing because our minds are limited. We have a limited capacity to attend to some number of things at any given time. And we have a limited capacity of expressing things and understanding things. And that's all fine. That's where we are in the universe in this moment. I just find it really helpful to remember anytime I or anyone else tells me really anything, they're just telling me a story. And it has value and it has limitations. And if we forget the limitations, it can lead to all sorts of problems, I think. And to be totally transparent, that's also true in mathematics. All of the mathematics, when we have axioms and we say 1 plus 1 is 2, even that is a story in the context of what people said 1 is and what plus is and what equals is. And other people may disagree and they may get to a different conclusion, and that would just be a different story. So even when we have math and we say it's true, what we kind of mean there is we all agree to accept this as if it were true for now. And we kind of do that also when we say this is a fence, or I'm a person, or that's a tree. But there's a lot more emotional weight associated with us making claims about ourselves or the natural world than there is typically about mathematical statements. And so saying that things are true in math to me feels like much more okay, because to the extent that it's not true, I'm not personally invested so much in a particular mathematical formalism or paradigm. But I am very invested in the narratives about who I am, who my family is, what I love, what I do, all those things. And so the point I really want to emphasize is stories are amazing. I love stories. There's no way to operate without telling stories. We can't describe things in their totality. We can describe stories, and so we need them, literally need them to communicate. There's no other option. And so they have amazing value for us and amazing limitations as well. And let's just remember the limitations when we're speaking so we don't forget the grandeur and the expandedness of all the things that we could be speaking about. And sometimes it's really useful to forget those things. It's really useful to focus just on one little thing. Like, oh my God, this little boy of mine who I love so much is this beautiful, impeccable, cute, brilliant, all these things. I love focusing on just those things for just this time. And then I can remember, he's also all the other things. And so is everyone. Thank you.